Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I hope you guys are doing all right today. It is, what is it? Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday. We're moving along during the week. Just as a heads up, I am not certain I'm going to be here on Friday. I leave on Friday to my next location. I'm going to be at the next location for several months. I'm going to miss it here. I actually like Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. It's been a really nice spot. The people have been very nice to me. The clinic was fantastic. No complaints. There's one complaint, but in the context of everything, it was a great spot. It was a great location. So I am going to miss it. When you're somewhere for 3 months, it feels like you live there, even though you kind of know you don't. But it feels like you do. It feels like you just have an apartment. So this just kind of felt like an apartment. I know some of you may have seen the thumbnail and think to yourself, what the hell is he talking about? Now, the geeks and the nerds of you will know exactly what that thumbnail means. But for everybody else, let me disabuse you of your curiosity. And it boiled down to this.
Mr. Chambers! Mr. Chambers! Don't get on that ship! The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook!
No! 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 No!
And Mr. Chambers is going to be eaten alive by aliens. It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. That segment was just Twilight Zone was one of the best shows or one of the best segments. What it boiled down to was aliens come to the planet. They seem to be very nice. They seem to be very, hey, we're going to work together. We're going to work out. We're going to help you and everything else. And there was a book that humanity got its hands on. They were able to read the title, and the title was To Serve Man. And so people were like, okay, well, they're here to serve man. They're here to help us and everything else. Fast forward to when they can actually go into the rest of the book. And as he's getting on the plane to go to the alien planet along with all of these other human beings, she comes out, screams, Mr. Chambers, don't get on that plane. It's a cookbook. In which case, the aliens are trying to fatten him up on the way to the thing. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump were able to meet in Alaska. They were able to shake hands, come to some level of agreement. And after that meeting in Alaska, Donald Trump came out trumpeting, I don't want a ceasefire anymore. I know I said I did. I know I threatened. I know I bellyached. I know I boo-hooed. Oh, Putin, he's such a bad guy. He's going out of his mind. I don't know what's taking place right now. He gets 50 days. You get 12 days. You get 10 days. Let's have a meeting in Alaska. And then all of that goes away into, I want a permanent deal. This, of course, shocked the hell out of Europe, who felt seen and heard when Donald Trump had the phone call with Zelensky and Europe before this meeting in Alaska. Europe was caught off guard on some level. Europe immediately wants to shuffle their way to the White House to have a conversation with Donald Trump and Zelensky. Well, Trump, Zelensky first, and then he brings in the other European idiots. A circus and parade of buffoons, a level of humiliation that I don't think I've ever seen in my life. All of these people who used to be masters of the world sitting at daddy's desk, except Maloney, she's unhappy. But all of them sitting at daddy's desk. This photo, talk about a century of humiliation. To make this humiliation worse, in the middle of the conversation, Donald Trump gets up to have a phone call with Vladimir Putin in the middle of the conversation that he's having with the European leaders. If there's anything to get across that you don't matter, it's this. Yeah, let me go talk to this other guy. Let me talk to somebody else. A lot of people have postulated and are trying to pontificate about what's going on. Because again, Trump is all over the place. And in being all over the place, trying to figure out, okay, what is he actually doing is of paramount. I would imagine Europe is trying to do that. I would imagine on some level Russia is kind of trying to do that. But I think Russia, for the most part, has accepted We are going to win this on the battlefield. Full stop. If the U.S. wants to do something, fair enough. Our objectives are on the battlefield. So it's a little bit different with them. Europe is the one that really cares about daddy and really loves and needs daddy, and they don't necessarily want daddy to leave. At 8:30, I'm going to give a monologue because I want to break this down. I know a lot of people have been very cynical about this, but I do think something took place in Alaska. And I do think something is taking place right now, even though there are a lot of screaming headlines that are out, like this one. This one is from the Wall Street Journal. U.S. prepared to use air power to support planned European forces in Ukraine. And then you have interviews that have taken place that sounds a lot like NATO by another name.
Would that make
Marco Rubio?
so these European nations, and some of these are NATO countries, are they willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine to cement this peace deal? Would that make Ukraine kind of like a NATO ally?
Well, what's being contemplated, look, any sovereign country in the world has a right to enter into security alliances with other countries. You know, it's not just NATO. We have such alliances with South Korea. We have it with Japan. Other countries have it with each other. And so I think everyone would acknowledge, including, by the way, for the first time, the Russian side, under President Trump's sort of pressure or, a suggestion, is that, in fact, a Ukraine post-conflict has a right to enter into security agreements with other countries. And we will work with our European allies and non-European countries, by the way, to build such a security guarantee. We're working on that right now. We'll continue to work on that. And that'll be something that'll have to be in place after a peace deal.
That is something that would have to be in place after a peace deal. Nothing is negotiated until everything is negotiated, right? And if you've listened to Rubio, even if you listen to Trump, we have no idea what that is. This is Europe and the United States talking to itself. We've heard nothing from the Russians on this. They have been quiet as a church mouse the entire way through. Europe and the US talking to itself. One of the documents, Sarah Bills, DD Geopolitics, she is fantastic, just came out. Apparently, this was a leak from hackers that were able to get their hands on the actual death tolls for Ukraine. It is worse than I thought. Ukrainian military losses exceeded 1.7 million dead and missing. Russian hackers have reportedly breached the Ukrainian General Staff's database, revealing catastrophic losses of armed forces of Ukraine. According to the compromised digital registry, if the data is correct, Ukraine lost 1,721,000 troops that are either killed or missing in action over the last 3 years of the conflict. And the numbers are escalating as the Ukrainian military gets weaker and weaker and are more unable to defend themselves. In 2022, 118,500. In 2023, 405,400. In 2024, 595,000. In 2025, 621,000. That is catastrophic. That is catastrophic. And to show how catastrophic that is, if you remember when these people were out there lying saying Russia lost 120,000 people in 2025, that number is 6 times the amount that they were going with, implying that, oh my God, look at all the number of people that Russia have gotten killed. 600,000 is 6 times the amount that they were calling catastrophic for the Russians, to put it in perspective. If you're asking me why Donald Trump went to Alaska, why Donald Trump is now screaming this notion of peace, which is effectively taking Putin's refrain, I would put out what is taking place on the battlefield is set in a context, facts on the ground, as some people would say. And in this case, also facts on the ground in regards to the number of people that are in graves in Ukraine, the number of Nazis that have been shot in the face, the demilitarization effort that Russia is effectively going with in brutal, militaristic, almost scientific terms. Trump, almost in the way that the architect of the Matrix explained to Neo, you are here because every man, woman, child, old man, elderly person, handicapped person that you are sending out will be killed, wounded, maimed, or at the very least, laid low. That's why. It's not that Trump cares. He doesn't. He's a sociopath. He's backing a genocide in Israel. They're murdering, raping, and starving people en masse. Trump doesn't care. What Trump cares about is his reputation and being a loser as a president that has the Ukrainian military fundamentally collapse on his watch. And between that fundamental collapse and a face-saving tactic where he could effectively, let's say, freeze whatever's taking place, the freeze is more ideal. Whatever deal you come up with, you can rip up later. Anytime America gets an advantage, it can press that advantage later. Meaning, just because you make a deal and just because you call it a permanent peace doesn't mean it's permanent. So yes, he would make a deal for a tactical retreat. He would try to give it all over to Europe. It's Europe's responsibility. If Europe want to keep this going, that's on Europe. I take issue with people saying he's trying to make peace. If Trump was trying to make peace, Donald Trump would stop the weapons. He would stop the intelligence. He would stop selling weapons to the Europeans. But Donald Trump's not doing that. Donald Trump doesn't want to do that because what Donald Trump effectively wants to do is hand it off to somebody else, or at the very least freeze it where he is not the one that looks bad when it all falls. There's a logic to what he's doing. It's called pressure. I have no impact on the Russians. I have no power over the Russians. My power is over my proxies, Europe and Ukraine. And the power that I'm going to use is to say no ceasefire. And by not having a ceasefire, I'm going to allow the Russians day after day after day to weaken Ukraine more and more and more until it gets to the point that that Ukrainian military recognizes we're going to fall. Now, those idiots can allow it to fall in totality. But I think what Donald Trump realizes is that nothing takes place until it becomes brimmingly clear. I think what Donald Trump may be getting wrong, though, on this is that the Europeans don't care. From their point of view, they may think that they're better off dragging Russia into a proxy war for a guerrilla war for the next decade. That's what they may think. So whereas Trump may be thinking the Europeans are going to get to the point where they get weakened, et cetera, they may not be thinking that. And what's even wild about this article pointing out that Europe is going to have to pay a premium on weapons that it's getting from the United States. The U.S., Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, is saying that they are going to charge Europe an extra 10% on whatever they sell Europe. That's amazing. That's amazing. They're not even hiding the ball. Yeah, we're going to charge them a premium for the weapons that we sell them because, we have things that we need to get ourselves. It's wild. The other part to that, and I guess it's about to come on, so I can't necessarily step into it. I'll step into it at 8:30. When this conversation came up, security guarantees and all of that stuff, and beyond the security guarantees, Trump is trying to give Europe the ball, effectively, division of labor. Hey, are you putting U.S. troops down? No, we are not. We may support with something else, but we're not putting U.S. troops down. Okay. If indeed you want Europe to take on the responsibility of dealing with the Russians, as they call it, how are they supposed to do that without their own industries? Right? It's a contradiction in terms. In one sense, you're telling Europe, you need to buy weapons from us, even though we don't have enough capacity to supply the world in the way that we could have done, I don't know, maybe in the 90s or whatever. Simultaneously, we need you to take on the Russians, and we're going to hand you over the responsibility of taking on the Russians. So the Russians are outproducing Europe and the United States, 3-1, with capacity to go even higher. On top of overproducing, you're telling Europe, we need you to buy from us, not your own industries, us. Invest in us. How is that not a contradiction? How are you trying to get, kind of like Romans, saying we're going to use the barbarians because we don't have enough Roman military. However, we don't want the barbarians to build their own industries because, hashtag reasons. We have a capitalistic imperative that we need to kind of attend to, which is we need to make more cash. That's amazing. It's delusional, even though I get it from the standpoint of how do we maximize our cash. I also get it if you don't believe that the Russians are going to push. I guess my belief is not that the Russians push. My issue is that Europe may push. So we will see. There's a lot of screaming people right now who are saying, it's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. Don't get on that plane, President Putin. Don't get on that plane. And it may be a cookbook. The United States, obviously, is not going to have Russia's best interests at heart any more than they had Iran's best interests, any more than they had, during the fall of the Soviet Union's best interests, despite the fact that they pretended as if they did. Obviously, Minsk 1 and 2. Obviously, Istanbul agreements. And obviously, considering you've killed 100,000 Russians over the course of the last 3 years, they don't have their best interests, right? I would imagine at this point that the Russians know that, and they are going to behave accordingly. The only point that I'm making with the screaming headlines, and this one also, we want the Europeans to buy $100 billion in weapons from the United States, apparently at a premium, meaning with a markup, in order to give to Ukraine. Match this with Donald Trump screaming from pillar to post that we are not paying for anything for Ukraine, that the Europeans are paying for it all. It's their responsibility. That's amazing. It's just amazing. That's just super amazing. But that is where we are. That is where we are. I'm going to play you another clip that has pissed people off. Well, it hasn't pissed people off, but it's making the point of Donald Trump and this idea of him teasing NATO-like orientations to Ukraine, and whether it's de facto or whether it's in actuality, doesn't really matter. The Russians are not going to agree to any of this, just to be clear. And people with good sense should know better.
President, but you got the Article 5 protections, though, for Ukraine. So they're not going to be a part of NATO, but you still got them the same protections.
We're not, so they're not going to be a part of NATO, but we've got the European nations, and they'll front-load it, and they'll have some of them, France and Germany, a couple of them, UK. They want to have, boots on the ground. Not in. I don't think it's going to be a problem, to be honest with you. I think Putin is tired of it. I think they're all tired of it. But you never know. We're going to find out about President Putin in the next couple of weeks. That I can tell you, and we're going to see where it all goes.
President, but you got the Article 5 protections, though.
Like, that goes nowhere. That goes nowhere. It's shocking to me that would even be postulated. That goes nowhere. Here's the catch. And we go back to the first premise. I don't know where my guest is. Hopefully she shows up before the end of the hour. And damn it, that's the guest I wanted to talk to. She was the one who was Equatorial New Guinea, who dad was president, the first president of Equatorial New Guinea. Dad was the first president. He gets taken on the coup. They get pushed to North Korea. She grows up in North Korea. She's just a fascinating character. Let me go back to the original story. Original orienting premise. Habitual liars lie. Habitual liars lie. Which is a problem and strength. When you're dealing with, let's say, US media, when you're dealing with Europeans, when Donald Trump had the conversations with the European leaders because they wanted to talk, and they came out of the meeting saying, we felt like we were seen. We felt like Donald Trump understood us. And then Trump goes to Alaska and comes back and says, we want a permanent deal. And they're like, what the hell just happened? Okay, who was Trump lying to? Was he lying to the Europeans or was he lying to the Russians? Sounds like he was lying to the Europeans because he didn't want to effectively deal with them having a collective shit fit with what he was planning on doing. That's what it sounds like. When I hear Rubio and Trump saying, yeah, we may have security guarantees, we may use air power, we may do this and that, we're going to help them out. Is he being truthful, or is he telling them what they need to hear? And do you know as a flat fact which one it is? Habitual liars lie. It's a hall of mirrors. Who knows what is in Trump's mind, which is kind of the problem, and which is why the Russians are going to keep moving militarily. I will tell you this, though. There is something Donald Trump said that gives me a ray of hope. When he was sitting at the White House with Zelensky and with the European Union, well, the parade of clowns and buffoons and degenerates that lead the European Union, none of which are popular, he said this. And this, again, when something is on his mind, Trump says it, which is a strength, well, it's never a strength. But it gives you some context into what's in his mind. Keep in mind, he's there with all the European leaders and Zelensky as he says this.
Of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace and you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept, you know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
Think about what he just said. Think about what he just said. You guys are pressing me for a ceasefire. Understand why you're pressing me for a ceasefire. It can be advantageous to one side or the other to get a ceasefire, depending upon effectively what's taking place on the ground. However, given a ceasefire allows one side to build up their military. And as they build up their military, it would obviously be a disadvantage to the other side. So all of the 30 deals that I've settled over the course of the last month, none of those had a ceasefire. And so, no, I'm not going to push for a ceasefire. I don't think we need a ceasefire. In fact, they need to fight. Why do they need to fight? That's the interesting question. I mean, listen to this one more time and put it in the context of what I just kind of pointed out, because I'm highlighting certain parts, because those certain parts are important.
Last week, you warned of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace and you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept, you know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop.
We got to work on the deal while they fight. We have to work on the deal while they fight. They got to fight. They got to do that. Why do they have to do that? They have to do that because one side needs to be bludgeoned into submission until they acknowledge that they lost between the two sides, considering if this leak is right, which the leak sounds right, by the way. I mean, the number I was used was 1.5, 1.3 to 1.5 million. 1.7 million, okay, fair enough, right? Is there a dramatic difference between those numbers? Not really. Hell, let's go with the low number, 1.3 million people, even though the leak says 1.7. Who's getting bludgeoned? When you look at the battlefield, who's getting bludgeoned? It's Ukraine. Trump has no control over Russia. None. He's tried to exert control. It hasn't worked. It's all failed. He knows it. He knows Ukraine is in a fix. He knows it. So what do? You can walk. You can do that. You don't want to do that because you don't want them. Donald Trump is abandoning Ukraine. You don't want that. All things being equal. So how do you get them to capitulate and do what they don't want to do? How do you get them to come to the negotiating table and make a legitimate deal? He's already told Zelensky, you need to be more flexible. How do you make it more flexible, right? More body bags. It's that. It's more body bags. I'll let it play out. I will let Putin accomplish his objectives on the battlefield. I'm not going to pass a ceasefire. I'm going to work through a negotiation process. Every day in the negotiation process will be advances made by the Russian military, and I would let it play out. Now, there's gray area in that because the United States is still looking out for the interests of the United States. And what that means is you may have this because you want to force some kind of settlement in the short term in this, or maybe even in the long term, who knows? You may want to force some kind of settlement in this. But at the end of the day, what you are effectively dealing with is a US president that is going to look out for US interests. And in looking out for US interests, he's going to try to find ways to go against Russian interests. So if the Russians are insane enough to let them pass some kind of deal where Europeans are in Ukraine, they would do that. If Russia is insane enough to allow them to, I don't know, have US air power supporting Ukraine, they will do that. I'm trying to point out that anything that the Russians effectively allow that undercuts the Russian position, the US will do it. So it behooves Russia to look out for their best interests. I'm trying to point out, though, that from the standpoint of Trump, if indeed he needs this to be settled, and if indeed he needs to save face by having it settled as opposed to collapse, then he may be perfectly willing to let this play out, let Putin do what he's doing now, expand on the battlefield, putting more people in graves, creating more handicapped people, until Ukraine cries uncle. Especially when you get 69% of Ukraine saying, we want this war to stop. Does it create political chaos internally when that number goes to 80%? What would it take for that number to go 80%? How many more dead would it take for that number to go 80%? And even with this threat of Donald Trump, let's say, pulling away and letting Europe take it off, from his point of view, I want to pass this off to Europe. If it collapses under their watch, that's on them. I don't want it to collapse under my watch, which means I need to create a context by which Ukraine gets that much weaker, that much weaker, that much weaker. Trilateral negotiations that Donald Trump is screaming for now are not going to happen anytime soon. The only way a negotiation between Russia and Ukraine will take place is if it's a surrender. And what I mean by that is the details and the context and the framework of that meeting will have to be set in advance. We're not talking about, how it feels outside. We're talking about these very specific items that you are agreeing to and that we're agreeing to in order to move forward. Russia's already said we're not looking for just this kind of immediate thing. We're looking for a new security architecture of Europe. And settling the issue with Ukraine on some level is kind of creating a new security architecture of Europe. Wildly enough, the Europeans just aren't a part of that negotiation. So everybody that's in this has things that they want. I mean, Trump wants a conflict where he can say legitimately, as opposed to the other six, I solved this issue. Look at what I did. I said I was going to end the conflict. I ended the conflict. Saying the Europeans are paying for a conflict is not the same thing as saying I got a deal to settle the conflict. Trump wants a settlement. The problem is Trump is like a kid with ADD. Have you ever known somebody who wants something from you or with you maybe, and you have needs that need to be met in the context of whatever they want, and they throw stuff at the wall and you point out logically that doesn't work, and here's why. This and this, these things don't work for me. This is not something that's ideal. And they throw something else against the wall, and you're like, dude, are you even thinking about this? That doesn't work. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. And then they throw something else, and after a while they're like, you're not accepting my ideas. It's because you have bad ideas, and your ideas are tethered around to what you want, not necessarily what is in my best interest. That is what Donald Trump is doing when he's like, we want to meet in a week. We want to meet in 2 weeks. Let's get Putin on the phone. Let's try to talk to Zelensky. Let's do this. Let's do that. None of that is happening because regardless of what Russia may say, they don't trust the U.S. They just don't. So negotiations will be slow. They will be painstaking. Trump seems to be willing to allow this notion of Ukraine fighting until it gets to the point where it's on its breaking point, with the idea that hopefully on their deathbed, they see the light. That may or may not be true, by the way, but that seems to be what he's angling for. Not wanting to exert his own power by saying, I'm pulling weapons, I'm pulling money, I'm pulling intelligence, figure it out on your own. And no, I'm not selling you weapons here. I'm not even doing that. So there's that. So that's what Trump wants. Europe wants daddy to stay. Part of the reason why I point out habitual liars lie, and that in the same way Donald Trump was talking to Europe once before the meeting with Putin, listening to everything they needed to say, and they said, oh, we felt seen. We felt so seen. And then he comes back and says, we're going to do a permanent deal with Putin, and we have some agreements that we've already been made. And they were like, oh my God, what? Okay, well, this is very similar to the meeting at the White House. All of these European leaders come. He listens to everything they have to say. He knocks down stuff that needs to be knocked down. It's not going to be a ceasefire. Hey, you want security guarantees? Yeah, maybe we can consider security guarantees. Maybe we can use American air power. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do that. And they leave the meetings like, we felt seen. We felt so seen. Were they seen? Or is this the U.S. president telling Europe whatever they need to hear? Which one is it? And how do you know which one, considering the quality of person you're dealing with in Donald Trump? Right? Am I wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. And last, as I pointed out, Putin wants security. His situation is a bit different. He is on the battlefield. They're accomplishing the objectives on the battlefield. The number of deaths have gone down. They are moving in a way where they know that they have a manpower advantage. They know Ukraine has a severe manpower disadvantage. They know Ukraine has difficulty plugging their holes, and any one hole that they plug opens up other holes that the Russians can exploit. They know it. They also probably have an idea of a kill count, whatever that number is, that 1.7, 1.3 million, whatever that number is. They know. They don't care what they say in the West. They care about what's taking place on the ground, because from their point of view, the facts are going to be determined on the ground. In fact, the entire Alaska meeting was determined and decided based on facts and power on the ground. They're not changing it. They're not stopping. They haven't slowed down. They haven't done any of that, nor will they. From their point of view, either we get a deal that we want, and they've always said we're open to having a deal, or they continue. These are our two options. We will continue until we get a deal. If there's no deal, we will continue. Politics is straightforward. Now, there's another element of trying to maneuver Trump, where Europe wants to maneuver Trump back into their graces. Russia wants to maneuver Trump to theirs. And by maneuver in that sense, from the Russian side, it's just Stop giving them weapons. Stop giving them money. Leave it alone. Of course, Europe wants security guarantees, which is why I'm saying Trump can so easily tell them, hey, maybe those are a good idea. The Russians are accepting them. We have no idea what the Russians have accepted. No clue. No clue. It is fascinating, to put it